directed by Terry Gilliam, written by I can never pronounce his name, Richard LeGravenas. The film starred Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges, and is a 1991 fantasy comedy drama that tells the story of a radio shock jock played by Jeff Bridges, who tries to find redemption by helping a man whose life has inadvertently shattered. It's a film that explores the intermingling of New York City's usually strictly separated social classes, and is a modern-day grail quest fused with dark drama, timeless fantasy, and a romantic comedy. The film was nominated for The film had 5 nominations, including Best Actor for Robin Williams, Best Original Screenplay by LeGravenas, and it won Best Supporting Actor, and it won Best Supporting Actress for Mercedes Ruehl. And I think Andy and I both agree when we say, we're both fans of Terry Gilliam, that this is probably his most mature film to date.
Yes. I mean, Gilliam, who previously, was part of the Python team, went on to marvelous films like Brazil and the notoriously over-budget Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is an absolute treat and getting deep dived at some point.
It is. And you know what? And I think because of Munchausen, Gilliam got painted as being difficult, got painted as being a director who would spend outlandishly. And because of that, he basically wanted to do a film that was low on special effects, that had a modest budget, and a film that he wasn't involved with the screenplay.
Yeah, I mean, Gilliam himself always had 3 rules when it came to filmmaking. Never do anyone's script but his own, never work for a major studio, and never work in America. And then to make The Fisher King, he violated all 3 of his own rules. And he's delivered, like you say, his most mature film. It's still got fantasy elements. There's images of a Red Knight who pursues Parry, the character played by the late, great Robin Williams. But at its core, this is a film about how lives can be permanently changed and damaged through inconsequential actions. How the homeless of society are ignored, but all have their own stories that we should listen to. How grief can break a person's mind. And it's a film about forgiveness, and it's about confronting demons, and it's a film about love. It encompasses so many different aspects and themes, but merged perfectly into one beautiful story of a man whose mind was broken, and he lost everything, his fiancée and his finance and his job and everything, became homeless, lost his mind, became a new person, but needs to reconcile with the events of his past before he can become a new person again. He can be redelivered, but in order to do that, he has to confront the person who was kind of responsible for everything that he lost. And I need to mention on the forgiveness thing that I love the whole fact that at the start of the film, when Jack, the shock jock DJ played by Bridges, is at the peak of his career, and he's being offered the key role in a brand new sitcom, and he's so against the fact that this character is going to have the tagline, like going to have a catchphrase of "Forgive me." But the film itself is all about he needs forgiveness so he can move on with his life and he can get back to being success. Because after the events of his honor rant about the rich and we need to take them all down, leading to one of his listeners who's a bit unhinged shooting up a bar that is filled with all the yuppies of the era, and that puts him into Shock Jock DJ, has led to this killings, and he loses his career. And 3 years later, he's now shacked up with his girlfriend above the video store that she runs, and he's an alcoholic and wanders the streets looking disheveled, only to be rescued when some rich kids go to beat up some homeless people by Parry, one of the victims of the shooting, and realizing what his offhand comment actually did to other people. There's so much depth. You can explore this film from so many ways.
I think in the hands of another director, we'd have got a much more straight, not to take anything away from the script. I think we would have got a very different film. I think we've got a comedy drama that, while dealing with heartbreak, would have certainly pushed up the romance angle. But I think with Gilliam, we got something that had some real depth to it, especially the imagery of the Fisher King, which Parry, played by Robin Williams, uses to shield his haunted, terrifying memory about the death of his wife. And I think Gilliam's touch on this, which is very deft, is to play with imagery in a way that another director might have just made a much more straightforward film.
Yeah, every time that Parry is reminded of part of his original life, be it his name being mentioned, or, you know, Jack trying to reconcile his own personal demons, referencing something, or when he occasionally, you know, he recognizes Jack from the offset of their relationship, because in their very first encounter, when he wakes up in the basement, he actually says, like, I know who you are, Jack. He knows who he is, and so he knows what he's responsible for. But that starts the images of, like, the Red Knight, which is his own demons attacking him, and he doesn't want to accept what it is. And as the film plays out, it's always this progression of, like, in order for him to move on, he needs to accept the Red Knight. He needs to accept his previous life. But part of that is, in his mind, he's become an Arthurian knight, and he's made his band of fellow homeless into other Arthurian knights to, you know, go on quests and do things. And the quest that he has is he seeks the Grail. And the Grail, it's just a trophy in a photograph that he saw in a magazine that a rich guy has in his mansion, but he's obsessed with it, and he needs to get that Grail in order to become himself again, in order to move on. But the key thing in this, and I said it's a love story, it's his obsession with the awkward Lydia, a worker that he follows, and he knows her routine completely. And it creates some of the most beautiful moments in this film, from the initial following her with a, like, I mean, Amanda Plummer on absolute magnificent form as the awkward Lydia. The first time that he's following her and showing Jack what her routine is, and you get that Central Station waltzing ballroom moment where all the crowds suddenly start dancing with each other, because that's how he envisions the world when she's in his presence, even though she doesn't know who he is at that point. Him knowing her whole actions and waltzing through the crowds. Oh, beautiful moment.
And that's what I mean by Gilliam coming on board this film and taking it into those beautifully shot fantasy sequences. That's the Gilliam touch. He takes the source material, the original script, and develops it into something much, much more. And also he gets great performances. As you mentioned, Amanda Plummer is always a joy to watch. But Robin Williams has increasingly I want to say that he basically explodes, doesn't he, the character?
Yeah.
This increasingly animated man who is touched by grief, living this fantasy line, and Williams is just this ball of energy that, as the truth becomes known, as the realization becomes clear, explodes, reached boiling point, and it is fantastic. And looking back, the guy should have won an Oscar for this role, because it's not just his stand-up shtick, which he got with Good Morning Vietnam. This is a character who has got so many depths to it. And Jeff Bridges, an actor I've always loved. I can watch anything with Jeff Bridges in, because everything he does, I think he's fantastic in. And this is Bridges at the height of his his stardom when he was at his highest peak, and what a joy to watch. This is a beautiful, touching, odd comedy, romantic, Arthurian fantasy of a film in the only way that I think could have been made with someone like Terry Gilliam.
Yeah. With regards Robin Williams in this, like you say, you know, he gets to play every aspect that he could do as an actor, but in the direct interactions between him and Plummer, that awkward dinner date is a marvelously put together scene. You get the feeling that there's some elements of improvisation going on in there because the two play so well together. They're the perfect match. And it ends with the sidewalk walking home and that marvelous declaration of love in the "I don't drink coffee" lines. And I had tears in my eyes at the end of that. It's the most beautiful walk at night between a couple who are awkwardly falling for each other that you will ever see on film. Amanda Plummer not believing that anyone wants to be with her except just for a one-night stand and then they'll get ditched, and him not wanting that one-night stand and turning her down because he doesn't drink coffee. If you've never seen this film, you have to check it out. Genuinely, you have to watch it. I'd not rewatched this for at least 2 decades, but when it came out, I remember watching it and loving it, and I watched it multiple times. You know, it was one of them that every time someone else was round at the house, as I put the VHS in, we're watching Fisher King. Everyone should experience this. And this week, rewatching it, it reminded me of why I used to obsess about making sure everyone watched it, because it's such, like we say, a mature Terry Gilliam film. It's the first film that Terry Gilliam made that didn't feature any of the Monty Python team. It's got performances from a marvelous cast throughout, be it the 3 central roles of Bridges, Plummer, and Williams, or the side roles of all the various like other homeless people who you'll have seen from other things, and they all get a chance to shine in this. All the way through this film, I was hooked, I was gripped, I knew what was going to happen, but I was charmed entirely. It's a marvelous, marvelous film about forgiveness, love, life, grief, and happiness.
The film stars, at his height, the ever-charming Burt Reynolds, screen companion Sally Field, the great Jackie Gleason, Jerry Reed, Pat McCormick, one of my favorite musicians and songwriters of all time, Paul Williams. And this film is the first installment of what was known as the Smokey and the Bandit trilogy. Also spawned rip-offs, lookalikes, TV series. This is one of those films that, at the height of the CB craze, captured an audience. It was a directorial. It wasn't. It was a directorial. I can't speak. It
directorial
was
debut.
the directorial debut of stuntman Hal Needham, and the film follows Beau Bandit DeVille, played by Reynolds, Cletus Snowman Snow, Jerry Reed, 2 bootleggers attempting to illegally transport 400 cases of Coors beer from Texarkana, isn't it? From Texarkana to Atlanta. While the snowman drives a truck carrying the beer, the bandit drives a 1977 Pontiac Trans Am, a beautiful piece of car, to distract law enforcement officers and keeping the attention off the snowman. During their run, they are pursued by the Texas County Sheriff, and what a name, Buford T. Justice, played with much aplomb by Jackie Gleason. And Andy, you love this film. It was the second highest grossing domestic film of 1977. Guess which was the highest grossing film? Andy, tell me why.
Was it something called?
Just a little film. Little film by I think it was. So he did very well against one of the mammoths of cinema.
Yes, and I adore this film. I got it bought for me on UHD 4K for Christmas, and revisiting it was an absolute treat. And after I revisited it, I sent a message to Lee saying this is becoming a deep dive in early January, so get ready for it. This is my revenge on him because Lee's not got the love for it that I've got. But what is it about this film that I love? Well, I was an early age when it came out, and I didn't get to see it at the cinema. I got to see it on home release on VHS, and it was one of the early VHSs that we rented out, and it was just a joy. Burt Reynolds, I think, sums it up perfectly, because he said in one of the extras on the Blu-ray and DVD that he classes it as a rainy Saturday afternoon movie. It's like Chinese food. About an hour after you see the movie, you might want to see another one. And I completely get that, because it's just one of those simple pleasures. It was like the rainy Saturday afternoons that we used to watch it. And all through my childhood, we'd go back to this so frequently. And it all hinges on the chemistry between all the cast. Now, bit of background on this. Hal Needham was the king of stunts. He was known for a lot of stunt work over films through the late 60s into the 70s, but he wanted to make his own film. And he built up a friendship with Burt Reynolds over the years. Basically, the story goes that Hal was going through a divorce and needed somewhere to crash. And Reynolds went, well, I've got a spare room, you can crash here. And he ended up living with him for 12 years as a result. He never moved out for 12 years. But during that time, they built up such a good, strong friendship.
And worked together lots and lots of times. This wasn't their only film together.
No. But it was when Hal wanted to make his first film, and he just had this idea of just doing this road movie with loads of stunts and everything, because that's where he came from. He didn't have a full script, but he did have notes on real scraps of paper that he showed to Burt. And Reynolds basically said it was the worst script that he'd ever seen, but he would do it. And in order to get convinced to do it, he basically said, we can make up the dialogue and go with it on set and work things out as it plays through. And you get that feeling when you're watching it, that a lot of it is just all the stars in it just riffing on what they can think of at the time. And it works to the benefit of this film.
That's right. Most of the dialogue on the movie was improvised on set. And if you ever see the outtakes, which of course one of these one of Needham's tricks was outtakes at the end of his movies, you can tell that these guys are having a whale of a time.
When it came to the casting, initially when Needham wanted to make this film, he pitched it with Jerry Reed as the Bandit.
That's right.
He only wanted about $1 million in order to make it. But he found studios very, very reluctant to actually even do the low budget of $1 million and take a risk with this, until Reynolds came on board with a fee of $1 million just for himself. And all of a sudden, a studio went, well, if Burt's going to be on it, because Burt was on a streak at this point in time. He was a huge name. And so having his name attached instantly greenlit the film, and they upped the budget to $3.5 million as a result. So not only did he have $1 million to pay Burt Reynolds, he had 2.5 times what he initially wanted to make the film in the first place to play with.
I'm just going to jump in.
Yeah,
I mean, initially Universal, who bankrolled the movie, we're going to spend $5.3 million on it, figuring it's a good risk. It's got Burt Reynolds in it. But just 2 days before production was to begin, Universal sent in a hatchet man to inform Needham that the budget had to be trimmed by $1 million. And with the salary, as Andy said, of Reynolds at $1 million, he was only left with just enough. So they spent 30 hours revising the shooting schedule to make it work.
When it came to the rest of the casting of Sally Field as the runaway bride character, who he nicknames Frog, because she's jumping around like a frog, and he'd like to jump her. It's lines of dialogue like that were made up on the spot that always get me chuckling. The studio kind of balked at the idea of Sally Field because she wasn't considered sexy enough. But Reynolds champion said she's talented, she's funny, that's sexy. she's the perfect cast. And you look at the chemistry between the pair of them together. The pair of them were an item during this film. They clicked so well on set that they became an item. And you can tell there's an absolute chemistry that really plays well. And Sally Field is amazingly gorgeous. She is charmingly sweet. And oh boy, she was an early crush, a definite early crush for me. She's still a crush today.
and so full of charm that she could play against Mr. Charm himself, Burt Reynolds, and keep up scene for scene, and at times, for me, steal the movie.
One of the absolute coups for casting was Jackie Gleason as Sheriff Buford T. Justice. Jackie Gleason was well known for comedy roles on TV and in films right up until there. So scoring a name like that, how did they manage to do it? Well, basically, Hal Needham phoned him up and just went, I'd really like you to do this because I love all your work and I think you'll be really funny in it. And he was just so flattered. He went, yeah, go on then, I'll do that. And once he found out that he could improvise and he could riff on things, Gleason had fun. And some of the best lines in that were not scripted at all. I mean, there's the great, like, there's no way you can come from my loins. As soon as I come home, I'm going to punch your mama in the mouth. And that was pure Gleason. Gleason also suggested that the son who the runaway bride had ran away from stays with him in the car throughout it. So Junior is always there alongside Gleason's Justice. And it gives that real, like, oh, you're a father-son relationship that the father is just absolutely hating the fact that this is their son because the son is so dumb, and that helps it. All of the things that make this film work are all stuff that weren't in the script because, let's be honest, Hal Needham as a scriptwriter, coming up with an idea, he was coming at it from a stuntman's perspective, and he had ideas of what he'd like to see rather than how you'd get there. And you saw this with later Needham films, that they are very chaotic, but it's the riffing that he allows his cast to do on set that brings the joy. And for me, it all brings the joy. And as a kid, it wasn't just the witty dialogue, but it was that car. Let's be honest. Any young boy who watches a film with a Trans Am Pontiac looking like that, who doesn't suddenly instantly feel a thrill and want to be the bandit, there's something broken. I love that car. That car is an icon.
So let's get down to the $85 million question. And do I like it as much as Andy loves it? I can see why Andy enjoys this movie. And I can tell his love for it. I like it. I do like it. It's not a film that I'd ever put on one of my favorite lists. I think I saw this in the cinema when I was a kid. I think and my memory is playing tricks. I have seen this and I saw the first sequel. So I must have seen the first sequel on television, but I do think I saw it on the big screen. It's okay. It works on its charm, the charm of the characters and the actors riffing against each other, some great set pieces, fantastic stunts. When I was a kid, fantastic stunts would make up for an awful lot of any film. You didn't have to worry about plot as long as you saw cars crashing into each other. It's a bit empty-headed, but it knows it is. It doesn't make any apologies for being a film that is a one idea narrative and just goes with it with its foot firmly on the gas. I would never watch this again unless I had to watch it for a deep dive, but I'm happy that it exists in the universe. It's not my kind of film that I would say that I thoroughly enjoy, but it's got Reynolds in, and it's got Jackie Gleason in, and it's got Sally Fields in, and it's got Paul Williams in, and it's a good time. It's a good way of killing an hour and a half.
It's one of those films that everyone was just at the peak of their game making it, and all bring their own energy and style to it to lift it above what it otherwise was going to be. Jerry Reed as Cletus also provided the theme song Eastbound and Down, which is iconic and perfect. Apparently he wrote it overnight, came in the next day, went, I've kind of put this together, but if you want me to change it, and they listened to it, went, oh, I'm not sure. And he was like, oh, I'll go and change it. It was like, no, we're joking with you. This is brilliant. And it is. It's a great tune. This is a film that, even though you could say the films such as the 1975 Moonrunners could have been seen as the start of the bootlegging and CB kind of trend, Smokey the Bandit was certainly the one that propelled the idea of these kind of films to a wider audience. And we saw a wave of trucking films and TV shows following. I mean, like Convoy in 1978. We had TV shows. I believe you mentioned to me BJ and the Bear.
Yeah, Dukes of Hazzard.
Dukes of Hazzard. There was a whole, like, up until the early 80s, you could look everywhere and all of a sudden CB language was getting spoken on every TV show, every film. It was all this like really cool, like, oh, you need to be in the secret club to understand what they're talking about when they say 10 for good buddy, we got a Smokey on our tail. It also spawned imitators. And basically what were the Asylum Studios of those days were churning out absolute garbage to riff on the idea. I remember I've got a tale from going to the VHS store, because you used to go into the VHS store and just have to rely on what the cover images were. And I pointed at a film and went, oh, that one. And we watched Smokey Bites the Dust in 1981. And that had nothing to do with this film franchise, but it was sold as though it was part of it. And it was garbage. But for Smokey the Bandit itself, not only did it get 2 sequels, the second one with Burt Reynolds in, the third one finally saw Jerry Reed play the Bandit, which was the initial plan. Wasn't as good. It was declining in quality as it went along. Stunts were still great, but clearly Hal Needham can't write.
There were 4 made-for-TV spin-offs, Bandit Goes Country, Bandit, Beauty and the Bandit, and Bandit Silver Angels. They were produced in 1994 with Brian Bloom playing a younger version of the Bandit.
And in October 2020, a new TV series was revealed to be in development, with a pilot that's been written by David Gordon Green and Brian Sides, being executive produced with his Rough House Pictures Confederates Jody Hill, Danny McBride and Brandon James. Danny McBride being involved in there does not surprise me, given his show that was kind of inspired by Eastbound and Down. Seth MacFarlane is also apparently attached.
I can see it working now as a TV series. I think it. I don't think there's an audience for this kind of film, especially when we think of the American Deep South and some of the problems that would bring to a modern audience. But I'm always open for a good car chase movie.
Yeah. I do like the little anecdote that Burt Reynolds has said that in the Deep South, he's met people who've said that they consider Smokey the Bandit is a documentary. And I think that perfectly rounds off this whole section on one of my beloved treasures from my childhood that I still love today. Smokey the Bandit is an absolute joy if you just switch your brain off and just watch some entertainers at the top of their game just riffing on an idea.